Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. Now in this video, you guessed it, we're going to be tackling Gatsby. Now if you've never touched Gatsby before, but have been interested in it, this crash course is definitely for you. So by the end of the video, you're going to be able to feel comfortable using GraphQL, Gatsby, how to transform Markdown files into HTML, and much more. Now bear in mind, this is not about styling, but it does allow you to feel comfortable with Gatsby, GraphQL, and Markdown files. So here we are in a very empty and sad looking project folder, and all I have is a project JSON file that has nothing in currently. So we do need to do some npm installs here to get everything ready. So let's go ahead and install Gatsby. Let's go ahead and install React, React DOM, React Helmet, and that will be a good start. So once they've installed, we can come back and start coding. Okay, so we've created our npm packages, they've been installed, and we're ready to start coding. So to begin with, let's create a folder called source. And then inside of that folder, let's create another folder called pages. And this is going to house any pages that you might want to create in the future. And then we'll create one file inside of here called index.js. Now this index.js is going to be our home page, and we're actually going to house the whole blog here today instead of creating a separate page. Now, obviously you can change this and modify it as you please once you finish the course and make a blog a separate page. And I will create a header in here that will have home, blog, about, and contact us that you can extend and create those pages and then use it on your own. So to begin with, we've created this page. So let's create our Gatsby. So let's do an import React from React. And then let's do const, and we'll call this home. And we'll add equals here. And we'll do an export default home. And inside of here, we can just do a return. And inside of this return, we can just do a div, and the div will contain an h1, and this h1 is going to be the classic hello world. So let's save that, and now we've created our first page for Gatsby. So now that we have that, we need to actually add something in here to our scripts so that we can actually run something. So call it dev, or whatever you want to call it. And then all you need to do is type the word Gatsby and develop. Now that means that when you do this, Gatsby develop will run and it will build, hot reload, and more. So let's test this out and see if it works. So do run task, npm, and run dev. And as you can see, Gatsby develop is being launched. It's building the development bundle. And after a few seconds, we should have a option here to select localhost 8000, or if we have GraphQL, we can go here and start working in GraphQL. So let's go ahead and open this page up and see what it looks like. And there we go. Hello world. Simple. So now you are a Gatsby developer. Go ahead, put it on your resume. It's good to go. So this doesn't really do a lot. It just returns hello world, nothing crazy. We can certainly do a lot more. So now that we have this functionality, we should extend it out and start creating content for our blog in Markdown files, and then use those to create our blog posts. So to do that, we actually need to install a few more plugins because I know how much everybody loves to wait around for our plugins. So let's go ahead and do that. So you're going to do npm install. You're going to do Gatsby plugin -mdx, and then you're going to do mdx-js mdx-js/mx, and then mdx-js/react, and finally Gatsby source file system. So once these are installed, we can talk about what we're going to do next. So now we've installed those plugins, it's now time to actually start really using Gatsby. So the first thing we want to do here is create a new file, and that new file is going to be called gatsby-config. So you just do gatsby-config.js. Now inside of here is where you can state some obvious things such as site metadata, title and description, plugins such as the plugin MDX that we just installed, the source file system, which tells Gatsby where to access files. So to begin with, let's start by creating a site metadata and also everything that comes with that. So you're going to type the words module.exports and then an equals and then open a set of parentheses. Then we can type site metadata, a colon, and then open parentheses again. So now what we can do is do something like title, and we'll call this Gatsby Crash Course. And then we can create an author here. And the author obviously is going to be me. So you can do a name here, James, and a summary. And the summary can be whatever you want. So I'll just type the YouTuber that you are watching, assuming that you're watching and not listening. So now you can do a description. And inside of this description, you can do another thing such as a simple crash course for Gatsby. And then we can do the site URL. Now this would change if you were deploying this, but for us, we can just do localhost 8000, which is the default. Then we can do a social here, and the social is if you want it, if you're sharing around on Twitter, for example, and you want your blog post to be able to know who you are, and also it works quite well if you want to have a link at the bottom, you can sort of use this as well. So we just type the word Twitter, and then just type in your Twitter handle, which mine is J_R_Perkins. And so for that, now our site metadata is done. So what we've done is we've just basically have now this title that we can pass around pages. We have the author, so you can pass that around as well. The description, the site URL, and the socials. So we have this part done, but this isn't really utilizing all of the plugins. So we need plugins to be able to read the MDX files and then transform them into HTML. And the way that this works is Gatsby has a plugin for this, and essentially it reads that file and then passes it back to us, and then we can display it to the users. So to do that, you just type the word plugins, and then open an array, and this is where you can put all your plugins. So what we'll do is we'll type the word resolve, and then do Gatsby plugin -MDX. And then we're going to do options here. And inside the options, we're going to state what extensions that Gatsby should expect when we do this. So for this, we're going to do .md and .mdx, which are two types of Markdown files. One is a bit more complex, and one is a simple Markdown file. So you just type the word extensions, and then an array, and then we use backticks, and then it's MDX, comma, MD. So that takes care of handling our MDX files, but we also need to tell Gatsby where to actually look for these files in the directories. So you can do that using the source file system that we just installed. And what we can do is just say, hey, this directory name / something is where I keep all of my blog posts. So to do that, open another set of parentheses here and type resolve, just like you did previously. And then in this one, it's Gatsby-source file system. Then you can do options here. And then the path is the directory that we're going to use. So you're going to use a $ here, open a set of parentheses, 2 underscores, dir name /blog. And that will take care of our blog. So as long as we have files somewhere in this directory called /blog in the root, so in this big root section, as long as we have something in there, Gatsby will look in there and say, hey, there's a bunch of MDX files. Let me go ahead and take those. And then we can give it a good name. So for this, we're going to use the word blog. And that is it for now. Now in the future, we are going to use something else to handle our images, and we'll come back into this configuration file and start using it. But for now, we're good to go. So now what you can do is actually create this folder structure ready for your blog. So you can just type the word blog, and that will create our blog folder, and then create a new folder in here. And the structure I like to use is the year of your blog posts. And then inside of that, you can create a folder for each of the blog posts. So we'll do 2020. And if you so wish, if you had some old blog posts floating around, you can do 2019. But I'm going to keep it like this because it makes this folder structure easier for you to read. So now we have that. You can create another new folder with the date as the beginning part. So we'll do 2020 12/01, and we'll call this first post. Then inside of this folder, create a new file, and that new file is just going to be index.md. And then on top of that, you can then insert any images as well if you had some. But what we're going to do is we're going to create another folder here, and that folder is also just going to be another one with a different date and second post, and we'll do a third post and a fourth post. So just copy and paste those folders over and over again and change the date from 01 to 02, 03, 04, whatever you want to use as the date. And then once you've done that, we can come back and talk about how Markdown files work and talk about how you can edit them and how each part of that actually works. So you've created these folders. I've done 4, and each one of them has an index.mdx file that hasn't really been touched. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to write 3 dashes on each side and then some gap here. So let's talk about Frontmatter, and then let's talk about the rest. So the Frontmatter is actually what we're going to use to decide on things such as the title, the date, the description, or the excerpt you might want to call it. And then underneath that is our actual blog post. So the Frontmatter is not the blog post, it's the part that you can use to sort of create the structure and the pieces that you want, such as is it published, is it not? And the way that this works is quite simple. I'm going to write the word title here. We're also going to write the date. We're also going to write a description. And then we're going to do published. And we're going to set this to true because I want to see it immediately. So the title here, we can just write first post. And the date, we can just do 2020, 12/01. And the description here, I'm just going to write some filler in here. So we'll just take some lorem ipsum and we'll just drop that in here. So as you can see from this, what we have is basically what I would consider sort of SEO maybe, or something similar to that you would use throughout. So you now have a title, you have the date, description, published is true. So underneath here is actually where your blog post is going to go. Now, if you've never used Markdown before, I'll make sure to drop a link below that describes all the different types of Markdown. But for this, we're going to use an H2 here, and I'll just write the word lorem ipsum as filler. And we'll also do maybe a list here. 1 dog, 2 dogs, 3 dogs, 4 dogs. So we have a couple different things here. We'll also add a paragraph of text, which I'll just copy and paste from lorem ipsum as well, so that you can get an idea of what this is going to look like. So that's a basic blog post. It uses Markdown, and obviously Markdown has a lot of stuff, but essentially it just becomes the basics of writing text. So for this, we have this is an H2. Then we have a paragraph of text, and then maybe we'll add an H3 here, and we'll call this a list. And then we have our dog list here, and that's it. So we can go ahead and save this. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fill these in with some random text that you won't see. But imagine that all 4 of your posts do have some sort of text or some sort of information inside of it. So I'm going to do that, and then we can start talking about how we can actually use this in our index file here and show somebody a bunch of posts. Okay, so I've created all these files and they have some post data in them so that we can use them in the future, and hopefully you've done the same. Now at this point, we're actually going to start digging into GraphQL and how it works. So go ahead and open your web browser, and what you're going to do is you're going to navigate to a new localhost here. You're going to type the word 8000, a slash, and then a couple underscores and GraphQL. And when you do that, what you can actually get is this. And what this is GraphQL, and it's basically a way of being able to visualize and create custom queries easily by clicking around. So first, let me clear this out. And let's talk about what we have over here. Now, if you remember from the beginning, we have MDX files, which we created that contain our blog posts. And we also have the site, which included things like the metadata. So if you look at this site, and when you click into something, you'll see that the query over here actually adds in. Now, if I say site here, and then click site metadata, so we're at site and then site metadata, and if we click description and title, which are 2 things we might want to use, and we hit this play button here, you can see that this description, a simple crash course for Gatsby, Gatsby Crash Course, and if we minimize this and go into our config, you can see that that is what I put here, a simple crash course for Gatsby. So I'm actually querying the data from Gatsby using GraphQL. And you can see why it's quite flexible and powerful, because you can sort of use the localhost 8000 GraphQL feature to create the query that you want and make sure the data is actually returned before you start coding it up and then spend hours and hours trying to figure out why it doesn't work. So what we can do now is sort of use that to our advantage and create something in here to show some stuff off. So underneath the export home, we're actually going to create a query here. So what you can do is do export const page query, and then equal that to GraphQL. And then use 2 backticks here to be able to actually make a query. So at the top of the page, you do need to import a couple of things from Gatsby. First, let's import GraphQL. And then that will come from Gatsby. So now we have this. We can make a query here and return something to our page. So what we'll do is I'm going to create a query here, and it's just going to be the same one as the one we just had on the website. Now, if you forgot what it is, let's flip back and look at it, and then let's add that into our query here. So here's the query, and if you've forgotten what it was, and now you have it. So what you can actually do is take these from the parentheses and actually just copy this and go back to Visual Studio Code here and drop this in and hit save. And what will happen is it will actually make that query for us, and what should be returned is that data. But it's all well and good having that data, but how do you use it? So inside of our function here, you can just go ahead and put in the word data here, and then you can do a query on this. So let's just do, in fact, let's just log it out to the console. So let's do console.log data.site, which should return our data from their site, which is part of this query right here. So let's go ahead and go back to our website and go and see if our console log actually works. Okay, so here we are. We have a hello world, and you can actually see the site metadata is part of our console, and inside of it is the description as well as the title. So we're successfully pulling that data from GraphQL and being able to use it in our Gatsby website. So this part is quite simple in the sense that we now know that we have the ability to use the title and description, but we also need other things like the actual posts. So let's increase this difficulty using the GraphQL visual first and make a new query and then use that to pull in the blog posts so that we can display them on the page. So here we are in the visual GraphQL, and what we're going to use is this all MDX on the left hand side to grab all our data. So go ahead and select that one and the query will begin. Then what you want to do is select the sort, because we actually want to sort these so that the date is in descending order. So go ahead and hit that and then click the order button and then select descending. And this is the beginning of our query. Obviously we need to add something in here to tell it which fields to use, but for now that's fine. So what we're going to do is add in our fields here that we want to sort on. So we're going to do the word fields and then a square brackets, and then you're going to do frontmatter underscore date. And what will happen here is this will give us the ability to sort by that date and then order by something else. So we can just go ahead and delete these two brackets here because we're actually using the same, and hit a comma, and that will begin the beginning of our extraction using GraphQL. Then what we need to do is select nodes because we actually need the node. And then inside of here, you might actually start to see some things that you recognize, such as the excerpt. Maybe you've used a slug previously. We're also going to need the front matter. We're going to need the date, and we'll also use the title, and we'll also use the description. And if you've forgotten what these were, this front matter was in our MDX files at the top. So we can actually utilize that and create something nice. Now, one thing that we can do here for the date is format the string. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to format this as D-O-M-M-M, yeah. Like that. And then if we run this query, on the on the right hand side, you'll actually see this, that we have the excerpt, the slug, which is the URL that we want to use, the date, the title, the description. So we're getting everything that we need to actually create some sort of card or some sort of way of displaying this to the users. So let's take this query and put it inside of the query already created, and then use that to sort of display something to a user. So go ahead and copy all of this from the all MDX all the way down, excluding these two parentheses. And flip back to your code and I'll meet you there and we can talk about what we're going to do. So back in the code, back in the GraphQL, you can see that we have this site and then we have these closing braces. So underneath this second brace here, go ahead and paste in this query and go ahead and hit save. And now we are ready to actually use the query we just built to get some data from our GraphQL. So what I'm up here is I'm going to delete this console log and I'm going to create a couple things. So first thing I'm going to create is a site title. And I'm also going to create a site description. And I'm also going to create one called posts. So for posts, we're going to do data.allmdx.nodes. And you're probably wondering, how do I know what that is? Well, the answer is quite simple. It's because that was what was in our GraphQL. So if you look here, it's data and then all MDX. So obviously at that point, we know that we need this data, and then we can pass our way through this. So now we have that, we should be able to use this to get our data. So let's make these site descriptions something useful. So you're going to data.site dot site metadata dot description. And again, in case you're confused, you can look at this query too and see site metadata description, and then we're going to get the title and make that our title. So we can just copy and paste the beginning of this and say equals this, and then add the title and hit save. So at this point we actually are ready to sort of use this posts. So underneath this hello world, first let's change this to blog posts and hit save. Then underneath we can actually map over these posts to see what we can see. So if you've never done a map before, you're going to write the word posts, which takes this and say post.map, then open a set of parentheses and then another set of parentheses, type the word post, then an arrow function, and then open a set of parentheses, and then you can actually do something. So you can say something like const title equals post.frontmatter.title or posts fields slug. So this is just to make sure that if we don't have a title, we'll use this as the title. So it's just sort of a catch here, just in case. So now you can actually return something. So what we'll do here is we'll return a div, and inside of that div, we'll return the data that we have. So let's do an h1 here and say title. And then we'll also have the date. So we'll do a p here, and the p will be post.frontmatter.date. And underneath that, we'll have another p, and that p will be post.frontmatter.description. So that will give us essentially all the important information that we have here. So now we can use that to actually create something on the front end. So let's jump in and look at our website and see what this looks like. Okay, so here we are on our website, and as you can see, we now have our posts. Fourth post, third post, second post, and first post. So we're actually grabbing that data from GraphQL and saying, hey, I want to map through it, which is essentially like looping through something, and let's print it all out on the page. This, functions, but it doesn't look very good, and also I can't actually see the data. So let's make a nice little card that shows this data, add a header, and then we can start talking about the complexities of actually linking these to an actual page using Gatsby. So we're back in the code, and what we're going to do now is create a new file here called Gatsby browser. So you just do gatsby-browser.js. And what you can actually do here is basically import whatever CSS files you want or whatever you want to use to style your blog. So I'm just going to terminate the terminal here so that we don't have any errors. And what I'm going to do is create a new set of folders inside of this source called CSS. And inside of that source folder is going to be a style.css. So now we have a style.css. We can now import this in our browser. So to do that, you just type the word import and then just wherever you've put it. So for us, it's source CSS and then style.css. So now this is available globally. You can use it anywhere. It's sort of like the app part of Next.js. You can sort of import stuff there. So now we have that. Let's talk about actually making this kind of look reasonably okay and something that is easier to read. So we've already wrapped it in this div here. We do have an h1, a p, and another p. So we kind of have that data, but let's add a few classes here. So let's call this card. And then we'll call this class name equal to card title. And then this class name will be equal to card.date. And make sure that the class name has a capital N, otherwise it is not read correctly. And then this final one will be class name equal to card-description. So now we all have that. We can then do a little bit of CSS styling here to make this work the way that we want. So inside of your CSS, let's create first a little bit of reset. So just do star and then open this up and just do a font family. And this is going to be our default for the whole thing. So I'm going to use Open Sans. And if your computer doesn't support that, we'll use sans serif. Then we need a margin, 0, padding, 0, border, 0. And this is to make sure that our styles don't get messed up and they conform correctly as we request them. So now we have that, we actually need to use some CSS to make this sort of card functionality that we've created here actually looks semi-reasonable. So inside the card, we'll just add some padding here of 2 rem. We'll just set list style to none. We're going to use display grid, and we're going to use grid template columns, auto and 1FR. We're going to add a grid gap here. And we're going to set that to 20 pixels. Margin on the top of 2 rem. And text decoration of none for when we have any links. And then we'll also have a transition here because we're going to make it do something cool. We'll just do 350 milliseconds. So now we have the card. Now we can do card.hover. So when someone's hovering over it, we can make the cursor into a pointer. And text decoration, we'll make sure that that's still set to none because this whole card is going to be a link by the end and we just don't want it to do anything. And then what I'll do is I'll add a border on the left hand side and we can just do 60 A1 B7, which is what I've used previously, which is just a like a blue color. And then we need to do transform, and we're going to do translate X 2 pixels, and then we'll just add a border on the bottom as well, and it'll be the same as this one. So we'll just change this to border bottom. Let's get rid of this big old space here. And then what I am going to do is add a first type of. So the first type of type is going to have a margin at the top of just 4 rem, and that's just to kind of push it away from the top. And then we have a title, and I'm kind of burying the lead here, but as I've said, this is going to be a link. So I'm going to do card title to an A, as well as card link. And then the card link, we'll also do that to an A. And we'll say margin, 0 pixels, font weight, we'll set that to, I don't know, say 600. Let's just fix anything here before we make any more mistakes. We need a dot there. There we go. And then we'll set some font sizes here also, just so that it's a bit bigger. And this is not really important. I'm just showing you this just so it's easier for us to sort of read in the future. And if you're following along, that's fine. Obviously, you could use something like Tailwind to do this, or anything else. But I'm just going to do straight CSS today instead of using something else. Then we have our card date. And the card date will just set a margin of 1 rem. We'll do a font size 1 rem. And then we just need to do our description here. And the description, we're actually just going to change the font color really. And we'll just add a margin here too. So we'll just do margin top 1 rem. And we'll just make this gray. So color can be 70, 70, 70. And then we can do a font size. We'll just do 1.2 rem. So a little bigger than the date. And we should be good. So at this point, we should be good to go. We have all of these done. And so let's go ahead and run our task here. And we'll see what it looks like. Okay, so it kind of sort of works. Our biggest issue right now is I think that obviously we don't have any container here. So let's go ahead and make a container to sort of contain all of this in one place. So back in the code, we're going to create a new folder here called components. And we're only going to make 2 components today. We're going to make a header component and also a container component. I guess we should make one more, and that's an SEO component. But we'll get to that in a second. So let's look at this container first. What we're going to do is import React from React. And we'll also import the header from header. And just so it doesn't complain, we'll just go in here and do import React from React. And then we can just do const header. And then we'll just do return. And we'll just do a div that says header. And then we'll export default header. And now we can use this to say const container equals, and what we're going to do is pass in children. So essentially what we're going to do is wrap our whole thing around in this container, and then anything that's inside of this will get passed in, and then we can manipulate it. So what we'll do is we'll return, and we're going to do a div here, and then a div with a class name, and we'll call this container. And inside of that container will contain the header that we just imported at the top, and then main, and the class name here will be main, and then we're going to pass in the children. And then we can just do an export default container. And then we are pretty much good to go. So we can just hit save here. And now we actually need to make 2 classes here in our CSS file. So we'll do one called container. And then one of main. So the styles for our container is going to just be flex. So we're going to use display flex. We're going to do flex direction of column and justify the content. So justify content and center. And then in the main, we're going to do justify content to center. Then we're going to align the items to flex start, so it'll be on the left. Then we're going to have a margin here of auto 4rem auto, so that should be in the middle with a bottom. We're going to set the width to 100%. And then finally the max width, I'll set that to 1080 pixels. I mean, that could be any number, but I just prefer that one. So now we have this container, we need to actually use it. So go into your index file and you can then import the component here by doing container from components / container. And then you can take this container and wrap our, instead of having a div, we can just have a container. Like so. And then if we go back to our page now and take a look, it should look a little neater. So back in our website, I've zoomed out a little bit. It's probably hard to read, but now you can actually see that these are in the center of the page and we have a nice little margin on each side. So this is kind of looking a little better. We now kind of have this hover effect. These don't click right now. And we have a sort of stand-in header, as I'd call it. So let's finish creating the header and then we can start creating the links and everything that goes along with that. I've hopped inside of our header here and let's actually create something that makes sense. So inside of the return here, let's do a div and we'll give it a class name and we're going to make a sticky header. So let's do sticky nav. And if you don't know what sticky header is, it's one that scrolls down the page so you can always access it. Just because it's easier than trying to create anything else. Then we'll create a few A's in here and we'll call the class name equal to sticky nav button. And what I'm going to do is create invisible buttons. Now these invisible buttons you'll be able to use, and essentially what will happen is instead of seeing the button, you won't see it, but if you click on it, it acts like a button. So I've created 4 different things here. And what we'll do is create another div here and keep these separate. And then we can rename them something like blog. And this is just for visual purposes. And then you can extend these out and create new pages and then add them in here and you'll be able to use it. So contact. And then this one will be about us. Let's hit save here. So now we have this. We'll give this div a class name also. And this class name will be sticky nav stack. Now we have all that. Let's just quickly create some CSS to handle putting this on our page and handling the sticky nav transformation. So creating our sticky nav here, we're going to also use flex. We're going to set the flex direction to row. We're going to justify our content to center. We're also going to align the items in the center. And then we'll add a font size here of say 1.2 rem. We'll do a width of 100%. And then we'll also do a padding of 1 rem just to make it stand out a little bit. We'll do position and we'll set that to sticky. We'll add a z index also of something like 10, so it's always on the top. We'll set a top margin of 0, and then we'll use something called backdrop filter. And then we're going to do saturate at 180%, and then we'll blur at 20 pixels. Now, if you're wondering what this is doing, it's essentially telling when we transition through, we'll actually sort of blur it and also sort of make it saturated so it kind of looks funky and cool. And then we'll just do background color 1 and then ease in and out. So now we have that. Now we just need to create our ghost buttons, and they're much easier than you probably expect. So let's set the text color to black. Let's set the background to transparent. let's set the border around it to 1 pixel, solid, transparent. It's not really needed, but makes me feel better. We'll add a border radius of 5%, and the reason I'm doing this is that I want to make the buttons rounded on the edges, so when they click on them, they'll actually see that. We'll add a padding and margin on the right of 1 rem, so that they kind of space out a bit more. We'll align the text in the middle to center. Display is going to be inline block. Text decoration, we'll set that to none. And then that should be it. And then we just need to handle when it hovers or when it's active. So we'll just do .sticky -nav button on hover, and then .sticky nav button on active, and we'll set those to color black and background set to EF. All right, so now if we flip back to our website, we should see something completely different. Okay, so here we have a sticky nav at the top, and as you can see, as we hover over them, they turn silvery gray, and if we scroll down, you get this nice blur effect to the blog posts. So at this point, you've created essentially 70% of the work. The last part is that we actually need this to do something. When I click this button, I want to go to that page and I want to see the blog. So let's go ahead and create the links for that, and then take those links and actually create the blog part of this piece so someone can actually read what you've written. Inside of your index.js file, let's go ahead and import the link from Gatsby. And then what we can do is actually create the link to the post. So the way that we're going to do this is I'm actually going to wrap this whole thing outside of the card. So anything inside here is going to be a link. And all you do is do link. And we'll do a class name here of card link because it's going to apply all text decorations of a normal link. So we'll need to remove those. We can do 2 equals open set parentheses and do post.slug. And that will look for this post.slug and make this whole thing a link. So we can do that. And one thing that we do need to do is actually add a key here. And this is a requirement to stop React from complaining. And what we'll do is do post.slug. And that will be our key because they should always be unique. You can't have a slug that's the same for everything. So now we have that, we hit save, we should now have a link. So let's go back to our website and take a look at it. So as you can see now, we sort of have this working, everything is scrolling, and when we click on a link, it doesn't work. And the reason behind this is we haven't actually told Gatsby how to use all of these URLs. We've just told it that URLs should exist and just go ahead and go to it. It doesn't exist right now because we're not transforming the MDX into an actual blog post. So let's go ahead and use some powerful features of Gatsby to create these blog post pages, and then we should be able to click on them and see the page. So here we are back in the code, and what we need to create is another folder. And this folder is going to be called templates. And inside of here, we're going to create a new file called blog posts.js. So inside of this blog post.js template file, we're actually going to tell it how to handle the creation of a page. So what we're actually going to use is something at build time. We'll create all of our pages and we'll be able to use them, but it needs a template to know how to create them. So go ahead and import GraphQL and also link from Gatsby. And import the MDX renderer. And that's going to come from the Gatsby plugin MDX that we installed previously. We also need to import React from React. And we also need to import the container that we created. And that's in our components files, which is /component/container. And now we can create our blog post. So const blog post equals, and for now we'll just make this empty, and then we'll export blog posts. And then that should take care of our blog posts, but now we actually need to create a GraphQL. So I'm actually going to hand type this one and talk about it as we go instead of using the visual, so I can describe exactly what we're doing because it's fairly similar to one we already wrote. So in the same fashion, you're going to do const query equals GraphQL, and then a set of backticks. And then inside of here, we're actually going to create something. So first, let me just disconnect our server so it doesn't error out. And we're going to write the word query posts by slug. So we're actually going to look for all the posts by a slug that we pass in. So then you can do $slug, colon, and then string, exclamation point. And then inside of here, we're going to do mdx fields slug equals $slug. And before we continue, let me just talk about what this is doing. So inside of here actually is going to be all the things we want returned, but this is the actual query. So what we're doing is we're saying that we're going to pass in a string that's going to be the slug. So we're going to pass that in, and then we want to find the mdx, which is the markdown file that has the field slug equal to the slug that we're passing in. So essentially we're just doing a match, and if they match, that's what we want returned. So what we can do now is say in here we want the body, we want the front matter, and we want the title, and then we want the date in that format string that we did previously. So it's format string colon do MMM just like that. And then this query will actually get anything that's passed in as long as it matches. So let's hit save here so we can save our work. So now what we can do is actually extend this blog post out. So we can do data, which is the data returned, and we're also going to do page context. So now we can take in our and destructure it here. So we can say front matter, comma date, comma body, and that's going to come from data.mdx, which is what we're returning right here. There's the front matter and there's the body. Then we can use the page context to tell us whether or not there is any additional pages left. So essentially what we're creating here is ability to go back or forward through our blog posts. So you can do previous, comma next, and that's from the page context. And then we can do our return functionality here. So first let's wrap this in our container component, and that will take care of that. Then we can do an h1, and that's going to be the front matter.title. And then we can do a p underneath, and that will be our front matter.date. .date. And then underneath that we can do an article. And an article is just a way of saying that this is a blog post. We can use mdx renderer. And inside of here we can just pass in the body. And at that point, this is actually ready to display the blog posts. And let's just talk about this mdx renderer. It's a plugin from Gatsby, and essentially what it does is it allows you to render this mdx file as HTML. So it takes care of like if this is an H1 and converts it to an H1 in HTML and vice versa. So now you have that, we can make a conditional query here and say if previous equals false or null, then we can make a little fragment here and say previous, and so that guarantees that it's available. And then we can just say link, which is using the Gatsby link again, to previous.fields.slug. So we actually have the access to that slug, and then we can use a button here and say previous.frontmatter.title. And then we can pass into this button the previous title name, so when the user's browsing the site, they'll be able to tell what the blog post is called, and if they're interested, they'll go ahead and use it, else they won't. So now we have this, we can actually copy and paste this function right here, and paste it down here, and change the word previous to next. And that will allow us to navigate both the previous and the new blog post. So you can go to the old blog post or you can go to a new blog post depending on how you feel. So now let's make sure that this is all set. So this should be good. And then move this inside of our return function and hit save. And there we go. So now at this point we should be ready to go. It's set from a couple things. So first, we don't actually know how to create this blog post. We've made this template, but Gatsby doesn't actually know how to create them or when it should create them. So now we're going to take care of that using something called Gatsby Node. And then we should be able to go to this site and check it out. So create a new file in the root of your directory called gatsby-node.js. Now inside this Gatsby Node.js, we're going to do quite a bit of work around using GraphQL and also using that template that we just created. So first, let's import everything that we're going to need. So we're going to create file path, and that is require, and that's going to be the Gatsby source file system. Then we're also going to need path, which is require path. And then we're going to use something called export.createPages. And inside of here, this is what we're going to do all of our work. So open up this and we're going to write the word actions and GraphQL. We're going to do an arrow function, and then we're going to open these out. And this word is exports, not export. Then we're going to do something called const create page, and that's coming from the actions. And we'll get into that in a second. And then const blog post template, which equals the path.resolve, which is why we needed path, because we're actually going to tell it, hey, we've created this cool template and it's in .source.templates/blogpost.js. So now we can tell it like, hey, like we have this template. Why don't you go ahead and use that? And then they can use that to create our pages. So now we have that. We actually need to do a bit more GraphQL. So in here, you're going to do a return, and it's going to be GraphQL, as we've done previously, a set of backticks, and I'll add an extra space in here to make it easier. We're going to open a set of parentheses and start with all MDX, which is the old one that we had. In fact, we're going to sort it the same way as well. So the word sort, I'm going to do fields, open a set of square braces here and do the word frontmatter __ date, comma, order is descending. And then we're actually going to filter based upon front matter and then published. Now remember I had that published before. Well, we don't want to show something if it doesn't equal true. So we'll do published and then do eq colon true. So if it is indeed true when we set it in the front matter data, which I quickly show you here on this one, as long as this is set to true, we will create the page. If it's not set to true and you're still drafting it up, we will not create that page. So now we have that. Now we're going to create something here and say nodes, fields, and we want the slug. And we also want the front matter title. We can hit save there. So that's at GraphQL, and essentially what we're doing here before we move on is saying look through all the MDX files that we have, sort them first by descending, also filter out any that aren't set to true, and then return these fields, slug and title. Then we're going to do a dot then, and inside of this dot then we're going to do a result. And we need to actually wrap this in one more parentheses like that. There we go. And then we can do this and say if the results dot error, then we can just throw an error, right? So we can just do the word throw and then result dot error. Then if that's not true, we can do a const and say posts equal result dot data dot all mdx dot nodes. So get all the nodes, and then say post dot for each. We're going to use a for each here, and say post comma index, and say const previous. So we're talking about that previous that we had in the before. And say equals index equals post dot length -1. So if the length is -1, null, else posts index +1. And then for next, it's going to be equal to index equals 0 question mark null. So instead of post.length -1, we're going to do is 0. And then we can do posts index -1 instead of +1. And then we can do a create page. And then inside this create page, we can do path posts dot fields dot slug. Component is going to be our template that we just created. So blog posts template. Context is what we have for context. So we're going to do slug post dot fields dot slug. Previous, next, and now when I hit save, we get all of this niceness. So what's happening here before we move on, because it's quite a lot of stuff happening all at once. Essentially what we're doing is figuring out if there is another one in front of this blog post or behind it. If there is, these will then be available. Then we're saying the path is the post.fields slug. The component we're going to use is our template that we created here. And then we're going to give it some context, the slug, and the previous and the next. So at that point, we can then use this template to actually create something. Then finally, we're going to do an exports on create node equal to node actions and get node. Then do an arrow here and say const create node field those are the wrong kinds of brackets there. We need a set of parentheses like this. And say equals actions. And then say if node.internal.type equals mdx, which is what we're using for our markdown files, .mdx, const value equals create file path node, comma, get node, and then we can actually create this node field. So we just do create node field, name is going to be slug, and then node, comma, value. That is a big file, a lot happened there, so let's recap. So what we did was we created our template here, and then we have this create page action. And what we're doing is we're getting this GraphQL that essentially is just returning anything that is published in the same sort that we had before, and we're returning the slugs and the front matter. If there is an error for some reason, we just throw that right out. And then in our posts, we get that from these nodes. We say if this post has a previous or a next post, go ahead and pass those along and create it from our template. Then we have this onCreate node here, and what we're basically saying here is if the node internal type is mdx, create this file path, essentially just create this file path so that we can get the data, and then we are good to go. Let's go ahead and save that. And at this point, we should be able to test this out. So let's go ahead, build our terminal by running dev, and then let's test the website out. Okay, so we're back in our website here, and we have our 4 blog posts. We go ahead and click one, and there we go. We do have a site here, and this is a button. And if you click this, we get a first, second post. We can click the second post and go to the third post, and we go to the fourth post, and we can go back and forth. So it's all kind of working, but it looks horrible. You can barely read anything. Everything's kind of all jammed together. So let's work on fixing that and making it look like a presentable blog post. But at this point, you're pretty much done. Your blog post works, except from images don't seem to work very well. This image is not working, so we should fix that, and we should talk about how that works in Gatsby. And then on top of that, it just doesn't look very good. So let's go ahead and fix all of that. So I'm back in the CSS, and if you remember correctly, we added a few class names to our blog template. So we have post heading, post dash date, and then we also have post body. And then we can create something here to make them look reasonable. So we'll just do a text align of center. We'll also do margin at the top of 2 rem. We'll do a margin at the bottom for 2 rem also. And then we'll do a font size of 3 rem. So we'll make it pretty big compared to the rest of our text. Then the post date, we can just do text align and set that to center. And then we'll font size this to 1 rem. And then we'll also add a margin at the bottom so that it pushes these away from the general text. And we'll add 4 rem here. So then on the post body itself, we're going to add in a margin of 0, auto, 4 rem, and auto so that it centers everything and adds margin on the bottom. So now we have that, we need to talk about something here too. So one issue that you will see if we save this and go back to our site, this part looks great, but what's happening here is it's not adding any spaces in or anything else. It's just all kind of crammed in there. So if I zoom out a little bit here to give you a better look at what it actually looks like, you can see that here, there's no like margin between the two. So what I'm going to do is just going to basically create a post.body, and then any H1s, any Ps, ordered list or unordered list, I'm just going to add a margin at the top and the bottom of 1 rem. So you don't actually have to worry about this too much, but I'll go ahead and copy and paste it. And then we'll also deal with this. I think this should be indented so that these numbers don't push out this way. And then we'll make sure that the H2s maybe are a little bigger. And then we'll work on these buttons. So to create these essential margins at the top and the bottom, you can just do post-body and then H1 through H4. Add those in, as well as ordered list and unordered list. So it'll look something like this. And then we'll do one final one, post-body P. And then we'll open our parentheses and make sure that we have a dash here and say margin dash top 1 rem. And then on the margin dot bottom, we'll add 2 rems. So that takes care of the spacing issues. And then what you can do is do a dot post body here. And we'll do H2, and we'll set the font size a little bigger than most of the file. So we'll just do 2 rem here. And then dot post body OL. And we'll also do comma dot post body UL. We'll do margin dash left, and we'll do 2 rem. And at this point, that should take care of everything. So let's just quickly flip back and take a look. So now that looks much better. Everything's kind of spaced out nicely. We still don't have images working at all, so we need to fix that. And we also need to fix these buttons. So let's fix the buttons, and then let's talk about images. So the CSS for the previous dash next button is going to be a font size of 1.25 rems. We'll make the font color black, and we'll add a background here of EF, which is silver. We'll add a border here of 1 pixel solid, and we'll also make that EF. We'll add a border radius of 5%, and you can change that as you wish. And then we'll add a padding of 1 rem around the whole thing. A margin on the right hand side, and this will help space them out, of a rem. We'll make sure that the text inside the button is in the center. We want to display this. We actually want this to be the word text align. And we'll display is inline block. The text decoration will be none because we don't want it to show as a link. The min width is going to be 25%. And that's just in case like some of them are very short named. And then if it's longer, we won't have to worry. So let's flip back again and take a look at this. So there we go. So now we have these big old buttons that you can click around, and obviously you can style them however you want, but it gives you the right idea. So the final piece of this puzzle is how do we make images show up, and how do we use images in our MDX files. So let's flip back to the code one more time and make some changes to our config file, and also add images so that we can test them out. So we're back in the code, and we need to install just a few more plugins to make this all work correctly. So do npm install, and we're going to do Gatsby plugin -sharp Gatsby plugin. Actually, it's remark images. We're also going to do the Gatsby transformer -sharp, and that's it. So go ahead and hit enter here. Okay, they're all installed and I'm back inside our config file here. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some more to this config to handle our images. So underneath the file source, we're going to add Gatsby plugin sharp and also Gatsby remark images. And then inside of here, we're going to do resolve. And what we're going to do is ask it to resolve the Gatsby plugin MDX. And then we're going to say, comma, options. And inside of these options, we're going to say Gatsby remark plugins, then an array. And inside of that array, we're going to say resolve Gatsby remark images, comma, options, and then we can set the max width of our images. So max width 1200, comma. And then we can hit save here, and that's it. So now in theory, I've added a few images here to our pages. So let's go ahead and run our dev server and see what happens. Okay, so we're back in our website here and you can see all our posts. And when we click on one, we actually get our nice image loading through. And you can see on each post we have images, and then on the last one, here's a separate image. So all our images are now available and everything is working as expected. The last piece to this tiny puzzle is SEO. So I'm going to quickly create an SEO file that we can use as a component and pass in things like description or title or the site or any of that kind of stuff, and use that as a way of being able to share this and it looking good on Twitter or wherever you're doing. So let's go ahead and create that last file and then our course will be complete. So here's our empty SEO file that we created at the beginning of our component. And let's create a React import. And let's also import something called use static query and GraphQL, as we've used previously from Gatsby. And then we'll also import helmet, and that's coming from React helmet. And that's a way to manipulate the head. So we're going to do const SEO is equal to open and a set of parentheses here and write the word description and lang, meta, and title. And these are things that we can pass in. We're going to have defaults, but you can also pass it in from the page. So we're going to do const, and then we're going to destructure and use the word site here and say use static query. And then we're going to do GraphQL. And then inside of our backticks here, we're going to create our query, which is just going to be query site metadata. And then we want the title, description, and we'll also, I guess, get the social, which was the Twitter handle. And at that point, we have everything we need from the query, so we can save that. And it's going to bundle this up, but we're not actually going to use it right now. Then what we can do is create a const meta description equal to description, or we'll take it from site.site metadata.description. And that means that we can either pass it in and we'll use it, or we can just use the default. And then the same for the default title. We'll call it default title is equal to site.site metadata.title. And then if we don't have one, we can use it as the default. So now we can do a return function here, and we're just going to write the word helmet. And then we're going to do HTML attributes equal to lang. And then we need the title, and we'll set that to title. And then title template. So the way the title template works is we're going to set it to the default title. And then we'll say backtick here, a %s, and then default title. And this is just how it's going to look at the top of our page. All null. And then we need our metadata, or the meta tags. So in here, you're going to create an array. And inside of that array, you're going to create an object. And inside of that object, you're going to create a bunch of different things. So each object is going to be part of the metadata structure. And if you've never done it before, it's things like description, OG title, OG description, etc. So you're going to do name, and then description. And then you can hit a comma, and then content. And the content will be, for this one, meta description. So essentially what we're going to do now is create one for the OG part of it. And the OG is the way it gets displayed when you share it around. So you're just going to type property, and then OG title, comma, content title. And then we can just copy one of these, and we'll just paste it to make life a little easier. So we only have to change 2 pieces of information. So this one is going to be description. So you just do description, and then this will be the meta description that we used previously. Then we can hit comma, hit paste, and then this one will be OG type. And the type that we're using here is website, because it's a website. Then we can paste this, and then the property here will be Twitter card. And then we're going to set this to summary, but there's a variety of different ones you can have. Summary, large summary, there's plenty of options. Just pick the one that you want to use. Then we need to use Twitter creator. So I'll just paste this in to save a little time. And the creator is going to be either site metadata social Twitter. So essentially, if this is available, we'll take that, or we'll just leave it blank. So then we need the Twitter title. So we can just do Twitter title. And then we can delete this part and just type the word title. And then we just need the description, which is exactly the same description as we used previously, which is the metadata description. So you just do meta description. And then what we're going to do is right here, we're going to do a dot concatenate, and then meta. And then we'll close out the helmet. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some default properties down here to take care of anything that we may not pass in. So you just do lang is English. Meta is just an empty array. And the description will be an empty string. And then we can do export default SEO. And if we hit a little comma here, hit save. So that's all finished, and we can actually use this now on another page. So let's take this SEO and let's drop it on the index page as an example. So go to your index.js file. At the top, import SEO from components SEO. And then what we can do is inside of the container right here, we can just import the SEO file and say title equals site title, which is this. And then description is equal to site description. And there we go. So now we have SEO set up and everything is good to go. So we're at the end of the video and you've created this blog through Gatsby, used all sorts of features including GraphQL and SEO, images, MDX files, and more. So if you did enjoy this video, make sure to drop it a like, tell your friends, subscribe for more content around the Jamstack, and until next time, see ya!